that ambition to make money was about me not feeling enough and me trying to prove myself. It's not necessarily about destroying that, it's about transforming that. And for me, I've been a lot more consistent and I've been operating with an abundance mindset of I want to help as many fucking coaches as I possibly can. Your clients aren't paying you to be their mate, they're paying you to be their coach. So it's like driving a Ferrari but you don't necessarily know how to drive it yet. And then also, Ferraris are really shit in traffic. So I see this a lot of ambitious individuals. They feel scared, they feel not enough, they feel a lot of pressure, they often trip themselves up, they self-sabotage. And we specifically work with the ambitious. But I think my relationship with failure has changed. So before, if I'd failed at something, I was a loser. Now, failure doesn't exist in my vocabulary. Now, everything's an experiment. So
Just quickly before we get into the full show, for any of you who's watched this podcast before, you will know that I am super passionate about this podcast and getting on the most interesting guests to help you get better results with your fat loss, your business, your life, and your coaching skills. But at the moment, 85% of you who watch this channel aren't subscribed to the channel. The bigger the channel gets, the better the guests get, the more high production value the show gets, as well as the clips get. So if you're watching this, please, can you click subscribe, like, comment, improve interaction so YouTube know we are a channel to be reckoned with. And then we can take over and then I'm coming for you, Joe Rogan. So Kyran, I was really excited for this show because a little bit of what you told me off air kind of reaffirmed what I was thinking this was going to be about, right? I've spoken to therapists on the show, I've spoken to great business people on the show, and what you offer really does combine the two of helping people not only get past some of the mental hurdles, but also helps them transform their business as well. But I always think when somebody gets into a psychology field, and your niche, as I said earlier to you, is much needed, but very unique. When people get into this field, there's often a reason behind it. What do I need to know about you and your backstory to understand why you ended up going into mental performance and psychology?
Yeah, so my ambition nearly killed me. And the way that worked was I used to be a boxer, very, very, very ambitious. My dream was to go to the Olympics, and that was drilled by a feeling of being enough, and then also a fear of not being enough, if that makes sense. So in boxing, the feedback model is really simple. You win a fight, you're the best. You lose a fight, you're a loser. And it's pretty black and white. It's pretty ruthless. You also figure out who's good enough or not with direct live feedback insofar as did you get punched in the face more or less than the other guy did. So through that, you could take a young, insecure kid and you could mold that, you could develop that. And it had a lot of positive qualities. And it was one of the best things I ever did. But that led me to a path of chronic undereating, an eating disorder, specifically binge eating from trying to cut weight. So I'm 5'8", and at the time, at the peak of my career, I was still 5'8", but I was 56 kilos. So I was massive for my weight, but just chronically starved. That led to anxiety, a lot of anxiety. It led to depression, and it led to me trying to kill myself. And I put that down to my ambition and my insecurity and me trying to prove myself in the external world of not feeling enough, really is what drove me down this path. And then after I pulled myself out of that hole, I went into software sales for 6 years, highly competitive, selling into UK, Europe, and over into the US. And again, very binary, black and white. You've either hit your sales numbers or you haven't hit your sales numbers. You're either at the top of the tree or you're not at the top of the tree. And you hit your numbers or you get fired. Very similar to boxing, very ruthless. And again, that ambition to make money was about me not feeling enough and me trying to prove myself. So when you have that driving all of this, you get to a point where you realize it's just not helping. And for me, I mean, if we think about why was TMP put here, our job was to help ambitious minds achieve psychological freedom. Moving away from scarcity, not feeling enough, feeling like an imposter, feeling stuck, moving towards abundance, growth, flow state, peak performance, fun, being driven by light energy, so abundance and growth, versus dark energy, scarcity and not feeling enough. So my two experiences in those fields, so it's 8 years of boxing and 6 years in international software sales, I started to realize that didn't make me happy. So I see this a lot with ambitious individuals. They feel scared, they feel not enough, they feel a lot of pressure, they often trip themselves up, they self-sabotage. And we specifically work with the ambitious. That's the one thing about total mental performance. You don't get people coming into total mental performance that want to coast. They usually want to make big change in the world. So when you come from highly competitive backgrounds, and I was very fortunate to be mentored by top performance coaches, obviously England coaches, business people, investors, VCs, those types. I was able to understand my emotions. I was able to understand business and performance, and then going away to study as a therapist, a cognitive hypnotherapist, an NLP practitioner, performance coach. We kind of created our own little combination, because you can be a great therapist, but you don't necessarily understand corporate or commercial performance. On the flip side, you can be a great performance coach, but you don't understand the therapy. So that's kind of where we've created our own little pocket of mental performance, and that's really the context that's built off of the crux of everything. My own ambitious mind, almost self-destructing, and helping other ambitious individuals avoid the fuck up and mistakes that I made to enable them to actually fucking love what they do, get more done, and impact more lives. And that's it.
So you mentioned obviously there, like obviously you had a lot of driven careers. You mentioned sales and business, and I referenced you on the Peter Jones Enterprise Academy, which is incredible. And obviously professional, high level boxing. You see it with a lot of people that these kind of things are very focused. It's like doing a diet, right? Every single moment of your existence is to hit that next sales target, or to win that next fight, or to get that place on that team. So what was it that turned this, what could be almost a bit, you said on off air that you have ADHD, this hyper-focused mentality on this outcome? How did that become a negative? Was there a catalyst? Was it like not making Team GB? Like, what was the moment where this became a negative thing? This ambition went from positive to negative?
Yes, I think so I've always had this inner thing within me, this inner drive, this inner ambition, this whatever. For example, I was really shit at athletics. I was like 10, running around the running track. I was always in last. Yeah, I was always going 110% for the whole thing. And the athletics coaches said to to my mum, if only, with all due respect, if only he had some innate talent, because his work ethic is like second to none. He outworks everyone on the running track. And they tried, because I run funny, my legs kick out. And they try it, like they gave me extra time and attention. They were thinking, I don't know, maybe if he just grows up a little bit, like maybe puberty will hit and he'll, because that does happen with athletes. They're a bit of a late bloomer or whatever. That just never happened. So I always had that innate, like, let's go. The moment where it became a negative was probably when I was about 11 or 12, when my dad was my football manager. We were bottom of the bottom league and he never picked me. And I think that everybody knows this, the manager's son gets a game, and not even I got that. And we were bottom of the bottom league. So that's how you know you're not inherently enough as a child. Now, as an adult, I look back at that, and that was my dad's not wanting to piss off the other parents. And I get it. But I was also dog shit at football. And there's still limiting beliefs around that, funnily enough. Even when I go and play now, I instantly I go into scarcity and trying not to fuck it up, but then also just trying to tackle everyone and try and chase every ball down. But essentially that's where it was born. And then you can't get substituted in boxing. So that was my time to shine, so to speak. And that is where all of that was born. And I do believe that inherent high performers and ambitious individuals all have that within them. These little moments of, as a child, they were told, you're not enough in some way. And then they go kids go one of two ways. They go, I either accept the message, I am not enough, and these are the people that don't even try. And then the others, they go the other way. Well, fuck you, I'm going to prove you wrong. And that's essentially who we work with. We will work with those ones that are, fuck you, we're going to prove you wrong. I want you to understand you don't have to prove anyone wrong. It's not even about proving yourself to yourself. It's understanding that you're inherently enough, and you're always enough, and you just need to move forward to something that's bigger and greater than you are. And that's an incredibly exciting opportunity.
I can relate so much to your story. It's very, very similar in terms of the person who was high working. I remember playing games of football and I used to sprint down to every tackle, even at the other end of the field. But I was terrible at most sports. I was all right at rugby, but that's it's very, very similar story. And do you think, because you were saying there, like a lot of ambitious people have this feeling of not being enough. And I know that feeling of not being enough has driven me most of my career. I think I got into personal training, whereas you got bodybuilders that get into this because they just love training. And don't get me wrong, I do love my training, but there's this fuel of wanting to be seen, wanting to be heard, wanting to be listened to, that's been the backbone of my career. And a lot of what you do is almost helping people realize they are enough. But does that take away the thing that fueled the drive and the ambition the whole time?
Well, that's the overachiever. I call it the overachiever's paradox, which is, but if I've always used not feeling enough and the fear of failure to get to a certain level, I don't want to let go of that, because how can I be successful without it? And you get stuck in this paradigm of, well, that's the thing that I use to make me to be successful. So part of that is actually shifting that and going, well, we cannot destroy energy. We're going physics. We cannot destroy energy. We can merely transform it. So it's not necessarily about destroying that. It's about transforming that. And for me, I've been a lot more consistent, and I've been operating with an abundance mindset of, I want to help as many fucking coaches as I possibly can. That's what I want to do. That I want to help as many people on the planet, and I want to help ambitious minds achieve psychological freedom and peak performance. That's it. That's my gig. And however long that takes. And if that's going to take me longer than I think, it's worth me sticking the course. But a finite limiting belief of I need to prove myself that I'm enough or not enough via some sort of competition, via how much money one makes, via anything like that, then you're only going to achieve it or not achieve it. And then you're just going to place your pins and your hopes on something else. So to me, it makes more sense to find something so deeply meaningful that it doesn't matter how long it takes. This is your life's work. And using the drive behind, I'm not doing this for my insecure ego anymore. I'm doing this for me, trying to change the world in my little corner, in my little pocket of the universe. And that's my life's mission. It can't all be sunshine and rainbows. There's always going to be ego. There's always going to be insecurities that pop in. But if the majority of your work is built out of love and light and abundance versus insecurity and stress and not feeling enough, I'm not saying there isn't a space for that. You know, when you're starting out in something new, that can help. That can help. But again, you'll always hit a glass ceiling. And that glass ceiling is really where we take the TMP hammer and go, right, let's smash through it.
Is that something that's also sort of been learnt from your own personal experiences? I remember reading on your website about failed businesses. So was this something that you kind of hit that wall where you put everything into something and it didn't work, and then you had to sort of like start from scratch and rethink?
Well, I think my relationship with failure has changed. So before, if I'd failed at something, I was a loser. Now, failure doesn't exist in my vocabulary. Now, everything's an experiment. So I talk a lot at TMP about the scientist mindset. So we're just taking experiments. We have a hypothesis. We think this is the way in which we can coach and this is going to help people. We either prove or disprove the hypothesis. It's not about Kyran and his selfish wants and desires and his ego and his insecurities. It's about, we have a hypothesis and the whole team is trained in this. The whole team, we think like that. If you look at this year, we've been trying marketing. We've actually been giving it a go. And every single campaign is just a hypothesis. We had the hypothesis that this will help. We had the hypothesis that this is going to do well. That's it. So I think those what I felt like at the time were catastrophic failures, and they gave me so much learning, and this underpinned so much into sort of what we do. I think I just realized that they weren't catastrophic. They were just a moment in time, and that's okay. And the learning off the back of that is, well, you can't really fail if it's just an experiment. You know, and even if you disprove the hypothesis, well, okay, all right. Top scientists just run more experiments. The shit ones treat themselves like a loser, like a failure, and then they jack it in. So it's understanding just everything's a hypothesis, and we'll either prove or disprove it. We take back the data. We understand, does that align with our values? And then we move on. Yeah.
I think it's interesting when you're saying about failure not being a thing in your world. It's not a word in your vocabulary, because it's something that people are so stuck in these habits of reacting to these things. And it's only when you stop and have a look back at some of the things you considered failures at one time, in hindsight, have been crazy successes. I've failed relationships, which you also mentioned in your write-up on your website, which I found was interesting, because a lot of people wouldn't think that was a big failure or turning point. It's just one of the things that happens to everybody. But I know in my experience, I reacted terribly to that. I got fired last year. And that would be something that looks as a failure. But then when I look back 6-12 months later down the line, you go, do you know what? Some of these things were the best thing that ever happened to me. These wouldn't allow me to be here. But it's remembering next time you go through a hard period, look, there's a light aside of this mountain that's to come. And we just need to remember when you were here last time, and remember what you thought about it looking back.
Yeah, there's a really good exercise. And if you're listening to this podcast, I encourage you to hit pause, put a timer on for 2 minutes if you have the space to do that, and then just write down every single door that closed for you, whether that was a relationship, a job, a sports career, whatever it is, with that particular door you felt like closed, and then write down next to that door which door opened. And what you'll always find is when one door shuts, another door opens. It sounds so cliche, but when you actually look back at the data in your own life, you start to realize, okay, all right, if this door's just been slammed shut, well, usually something good happens. And guess what? You might get 2 or 3 doors slammed shut in a row, and I've certainly had that. And you go, okay, well, what's the next door? And as long as you keep knocking, something else will come through.
Yeah, and it always does. Like, hardly anything is catastrophic enough you don't bounce back from. You just need enough time in hindsight to realize that is the case.
Yeah, and as an entrepreneur and as a coach, you know, a lot of people look at client coaching results, but they kind of forget like the results they didn't get, and often in the results that you didn't get is where the learning is. Yeah. I kind of got a lot of that out the way early, and the way that I got that out the way early was when I was training on my course. I worked with so many people for free. I think that the course founder had said he didn't know as anyone else had done as many practice sessions. So when I was doing, I think 5 to 7 sessions or practice sessions a week when I was doing my training, and typically people would do 1 a week or 2 a week. I was doing 5 to 7. So by the end of the course, I'd already coached 40 people for free, and I'd made a load of failures and made a load of fuck ups. So when I come out, a lot of people that were on the course said to me like, "Fucking hell, man! Like, how did you do that all so quick?" So I just got started earlier, and I just got started at a faster pace. And it was in those ones where you disprove, okay, well, that didn't work. Why didn't that work? Maybe you need to shut up a little bit more, or maybe you need to be a bit more direct, or maybe you need to try this or try that. And another thing was everybody was allowed to call the course tutor once a week. And every week I'd call him. And then one week I didn't call him, and he emailed me and said, "Hey, Kyran, just as a heads up, I'm gonna be free for another hour if you call him this week." Like he trained himself to listen for my call, And I think through just raw pushing, I was able to get a lot of failure out of the way, and it just builds up the relative experience points. So when you start to use your intuition based on your experience and who you've worked with and who you haven't worked with, you're like, okay, you know what? I've tried this a couple of times now. For this individual, that's probably not going to work. And you start to build that inner wisdom, because we all have it. It's just our fears of not being enough that gets in the way of it.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that about the amount of experience that you gained in a short period of time. I remember my first year when I worked at UP, I did basically 5 years worth of experience within the first 12 months of just taking every session that could come through the door. But similar to what you said off air about procrastination being an emotional trigger, sometimes getting to that hurdle of taking on all the free sessions or calling your mentor and being happy to be wrong is a mental hurdle in itself. I remember early on in my career, I had a mentor say to me that I needed to be more proactive, not reactive. And I'm naturally quite a proactive person. And I realized it was my fear of being wrong that was the issue. So do you see a lot of people that maybe want to ask more questions, want to put themselves out there more, but struggle with it with your clients, and how do they overcome that?
Well, I think it comes down to everything's an experiment again. So if you go in with a question or a suggestion of, I'm trying to prove how smart I am or how good I am, well, then you've already failed. Whereas if you go, you know what, let's test something, and ask the client for permission. Hey, I'd love to test something with you. What do you think? That sounds a lot more fun and exciting for the right clients than trying to guess. So by having the hypothesis mindset, it kind of overrides all of that. It's like, well, it's either going to work or it's not, and it's just more data to put into the calculation of next time. And for some people, that will be quite scary. But at the end of the day, your clients aren't paying you to be their mate; they're paying you to be their coach. And one thing we have a bit of a reputation for at TMP is asking you the questions, not that telling you not necessarily what you want to hear, but what you need to hear, and that can be very unsettling, and that can be very deeply uncomfortable, and that's not for everyone. So for me, it's a case of just understanding, well, if it's an experiment, like, what have you got to lose? You've got nothing to lose, but it'll be your emotions that are getting in the way. You touched on procrastination. A lot of procrastination isn't that you're lazy, but you'll use it as evidence to support a belief that you have about yourself being lazy. A lot of procrastination is an emotional issue. So some of the things I check in first if a client says I'm stuck with procrastination is, well, are you just tired? Yeah, I'm not sleeping very well. What's keeping you up at night? I'm getting anxious and overstressed and I'm thinking too much. Okay, Well, let's do some work on that first before we say you're lazy. Okay. And start to understand that. If it's not a tiredness and a fatigue issue, and the training's going well, the nutrition's going well, sleep's going well, and that person as an individual is physically firing very well. Well, then we'll go, okay, well, what are the emotions that are coming up? Oh, it's anxiety. I'm crippled by it. Well, tell me more about that. Well, I've got this sort of fear that it's all going to come crashing down. So because of that, I panic. So then when I'm looking at my to-do list, I can't pick what I need to do, or I know I need to do it, but I just don't know what's stopping me. And I get more stressed about that. And then I get stuck going around in loops. So then from that side of things, that's where we go, right, well, where does the anxiety come from? How long has that been going on? When did that start? Have you always had this anxiety, or is it something that's new? We start to put those in little boxes, and then we start to make shifts. A lot of procrastination isn't what you think. A lot of procrastination literally just is. There are emotional puzzles that are getting in the way, and if you can make the right shifts and build the right playbooks around them, and you can shift them. Sometimes it's just your inner wisdom saying, I need a fucking break, pal. I need a minute. Yeah. And instead of you berating yourself or beating yourself up for it, surrendering to that, going, all right, I'll give you a minute. You know what? I don't actually have that as much on as I think. I'm just going to go for a walk this evening, and being at peace with that. It was, I'll tell you what, I'm going to find the quote here. I was listening to a podcast by Pete Crone, and he's an interesting dude. He calls himself the mind architect. And he said, security to me is being able to sit in the absence of security. So when you think about that, that takes me back to Sartre's line of all of man's problems stem from an inability to sit in a room alone with his own thoughts. That's what that screams to me. There's the two links that I get from that. As an online coach, you're going to spend a lot of time by yourself in a room alone with your own thoughts. So you need to be able to build systems, and you need to build a beautiful belief system that enables you to be like water and flow with procrastination, understand it, and understand that it's not inherently evidence of you not being enough and thus lazy, thus beating yourself up, but understanding it's just data. Every emotion is just data, and it's usually data around an unmet need. And you don't have to overanalyze them. You can just be fucking fucked off, procrastinating, anxious, light, and tired. And that's okay. But when you try and fight those emotions, you're just wasting energy and bandwidth. So then you guess what? They're going to come back even more and more and more and more and more. So you have a beautiful opportunity to navigate those and create playbooks, which is a lot of what we do at TMP, is building mental resilience playbooks. So if you're somebody that struggles with procrastination a lot, having direct playbooks of I run the playbook of 1, 2, and 3. And then if that doesn't work, I run this playbook 1, 2, 3. And if that doesn't work, I need to surrender to it and come back to it. And that's that was something that I picked up on the procrastination question, because often that is the one thing that people have an odd relationship with.
Yes, I was, as I said to you off air, I was diagnosed with ADHD this year, and I've had it all my life. I never, you'll never meet anyone that's lost more pairs of shoes and jackets in your life. Like I always thought, I'm an idiot. How can I lose something that's on the back of my chair or on my feet? And when I got diagnosed, it was this really powerful moment where I actually started to be able to have an answer, which allowed me to then delve down the rabbit hole of wondering why I do certain things and procrastinate. And a lot of it for me is like assuming I can do more in my day than I can, filling my to-do list with stuff. And what resonated with me there is like, sometimes you're not as busy as you think you are. And sometimes it's when I get so burnt out that I just go, I just need this afternoon to do nothing. I realized half the stuff on my to-do list wasn't urgent. And the feeling of procrastination that I had of me thinking it's lazy, I was like, well, hold on. In 4 hours' time, I might go into a hyper-focus mode and be up until 2 a.m. working. I ain't lazy. There's something else going on here. And that really started to transform my way in thinking about a lot of things, procrastination and what I'll move on to next, and that's imposter syndrome.
Yeah, and when we think about ADHD is it's I don't know if you've heard of hunter-farmer theory. But hunter-farmer theory is people that are wired with ADHD typically would have been the hunters of the tribe. And this might sound very egotistical, but hear me out. If we think about the typical ADHD traits, it's being hyper alert, it's being hyper distractible, it's seeing something, focusing, and then just doing nothing. And it's only chasing the things that are interesting. Well, that's really helpful to hunters, because hunters need to be distractible. If they hear a snap behind them, you need to know that there's a tiger behind you. So, oh shit, okay, that's there. So always on. They need to hyper focus on chasing down, I don't know, a wild. Humans didn't hunt bears. I'm trying to think of what they used to hunt. Let's say a wild boar, right? They go hunting wild boar. There's a few of you around. You focus, get the wild boar, take it home, breathe, relax, chill. And then you go again. Farmers, on the other hand, was a completely different ballgame. Farmers is about patience. It's about taking your time. It's about building farms and cattle and rearing, and it's a different skill set. Now, with industrialization, the world was built for farmers. And for years and years and years, it was built for that. Well, now it's starting to shift back towards hunters because the old stable job of 30, 40 years just isn't there anymore. So we're seeing lots of micro entrepreneurs and freelancers building their own work, and that suits a hunter. So when you can start to understand that that's what's happening, and then it can change the game. But what you'll find with ADHD is, I say it's like driving a Ferrari, but you don't necessarily know how to drive it yet. And then also, Ferraris are really shit in traffic, really shit in traffic. So, it's not this car's better than everyone else's. No, it has some really good upsides, but it has some really shit downsides, like forgetfulness, like lack of executive function, like easily overwhelmed, like emotional sensitivity, like struggling with feedback. Like you can take that as a personal attack. Holding down relationships is really fucking hard. I find any personal relationship really difficult. Work ones, easy. Personal ones, oh God. So it's understanding that, well, if you have a hunter type and you have this thing, it's like a double-edged sword, and one half of that sword is fucking sharp and the other half is very blunt, and you have to build a lifestyle and build a series of systems and a team around you that can navigate that can work with you through that. So it's a wonderful opportunity, and congratulations on getting the diagnosis. I know for me, I let go of years of shame once I saw. I remember very specifically, I was meditating. I'm not a big meditator, but I decided to meditate, and I just had this moment of forgiveness, and it all became clear. And from there, I was able to rebuild. It took me a long time, and I wish. Obviously, that's what kind of part of I've built TMP is a lot of the performance stuff comes from me trying to manage undiagnosed ADHD. And once I learned that was the case, well, guess what? When you apply those same principles to neurotypicals or farmer types, well, fucking hell, it's like gold dust. It changes the game. So you've got a real amazing opportunity coming up in 2023. Is if you're coming out of a lot of dust and rubble of that diagnosis and all of the consequences that have led to that diagnosis. Well, you can really build something really beautiful and powerful next year. But you do need the right frameworks, you need the right people around you, and you need to be able to have the playbooks in order to navigate that, if that makes sense.
Do you think, because ADHD is something that, I don't know whether it's just my own echo chambers online as I've been diagnosed and researched, but it seems to be something that's becoming more and more prevalent. Do you think there's a lot of misdiagnosed ADHD that's actually just high sympathetic drive, that people now just are so go all the time, they've forgot what it's like to truly get into sort of like a parasympathetic state?
I think it depends on which camp you fall into. So there's the trauma camp and then there's the genetic camp. I think it's probably a bit of both. They say genetics load the gun, environment pulls the trigger. I think it's a little bit of both. Like even if I'm sat here right now, I might look pretty stable on the camera. My feet, my hands are doing this. I always have something that I'm playing with to try and concentrate in my conversations. I've been like that since I was born. I was always fidgeting. I was always. So I do believe there's an element of genetics. I do believe environment can also lead a child to go inside. And understanding that will change the game. So is it becoming more prevalent? Probably. The amount of dopamine and stimulus we're exposing kids to as kids through phones and laptops and games and whatever. It's all built for quick, cheap dopamine hits. Now. We know that young people aren't taking up golf. You might say, what the fuck's that got to do with anything? Think about golf. Golf is inherently difficult. It takes a long time to get good at golf. Whereas gaming, you can get direct feedback right now. And, if you play like a warfare game, you pull a trigger, boom, I've killed someone. Great. Instant dopamine hit. I love that. Thank you. So I think it's a little bit of environment. I think a lot of it is education. People are becoming more aware of what it actually is. And if you're not diagnosed as a kid, it can be pretty difficult. It led to a lot of difficulties for me. I told my parents about it and they were like, oh yeah, it kind of makes sense. I was furious, but at the same time I wasn't, because they would have probably put me on meds, and I don't medicate for mine. I use training, nutrition, journaling, sleep, water, and very, very, very good weekly and daily structures. On top of that, I've done a shitload of one-to-one therapy and mindset coaching, over 150 hours of that. So that's enabled me to kind of put that all in its box, but I'm very aware when I'm not firing, and I have a lot more time and patience for myself when that is the case, particularly if, let's say I start dating someone. It fucks my ADHD because you have to compromise with someone else. And I found all of these perfect routines and they work for me. But when you ask me to come out of that, it really fucks with that. It really messes with it. So it then creates a bit of, but then when you can breathe and go, okay, all right, it's fine. Get back to basics and we'll come out of this, you know? So it's a wonderful opportunity you have. It really, really is. It's just making sure that you can navigate it in the right way, you know?
You mentioned the accessibility of dopamine, especially in children. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and looking how the kind of people I work with, in terms of when I'm working, not so much the coaches that I mentor, but more the clients that I work with, how the game has changed. I remember a few years ago, MyFitnessPal didn't exist. You know, people were given steak and nuts for breakfast, and you just did it. There wasn't daily communication. There wasn't all that. People just got on with stuff. Whereas now I feel that personal trainers, I don't want to sound disrespectful to clients, but almost have to babysit more. They have to, like, if they're not there and thereabouts and messaging people daily, adherence tends to unravel. Do you see in the 3 years that you've been running, has the kind of problems you see changed? Do you think people are becoming less patient, less being able to delay gratification? Is that more of a struggle than it used to be? Or is it always the same?
No, we want shit now. You know, so I live in Dubai and you can get shit now. Here's an example that blows my mind with the health system here. I decided to speak to a doctor. So I went onto my health insurance app. I says, how do I speak to a doctor? And it says, speak to a doctor now. And I said, now? I'm used to waiting a week or two on the NHS. I press now. So I click on that. Within 3 minutes, I'm speaking to a doctor. I'm like, okay, I'm speaking to the doctor. And then it gives the diagnosis and it says, oh, we think it's going to be allergies. So we're going to send you some antihistamines. You know, just want to confirm your address. Yeah, so that's going to be with you within an hour. I was like, what do you mean within an hour? Yeah, they'll have it delivered. So I put the phone down. Within 45 minutes, there's a knock on the door, and there are the antihistamines and some nasal spray. So within an hour and a half of deciding to speak to a doctor, I've got my diagnosis, I've gotten whatever. Now, the antihistamines have a quality to them that actually can trigger depression and suicidal thoughts, which I then proceeded to experience 2 days after taking it. So that was like, oh shit, okay, that's not good. But at the same, that you respect the speed of disproving the hypothesis that, you know, antihistamines will help me. So that was amazing. And that's now my standard. So we adjust as human beings so quickly. The idea of having to wait 2 weeks to speak to a doctor is fucking weird. Same with Amazon. What do you mean it's not next day delivery? It's so hard for e-commerce retailers to compete with that, because they can, if you're self-fulfillment, you don't have the logistics network that Amazon have. Yet your clients have to wait 3 to 5 days to get it. That's heavy. It's a long time. So fuck's sake. So I think as a world, we've become impatient due to our standards. Ricky Gervais talks about going to the Golden Globes. First time he'd ever went, they put him in this limo, and it was like a stretch Hummer, and it had like lights in the ceiling, and it had champagne, and it had all of these different things. And he's never, ever, ever been in a limo. And then he's having a great week partying around, and then he's been in all these different limos. And then the limo that was taking him back to the airport wasn't quite as flash as the other ones. So he goes, oh, this limo's a bit shit, isn't it? But like 7 days before, he'd never been in a limo. So we adapt so fucking quick. So I think it's more our environments and the way that our nervous systems and our brains are adapting to our environments that are leading to an immediate hit of dopamine, because that becomes the standard. And with that comes shortcuts. With that comes a lapse in attention, you know, like they're studying the ability to sit still and watch a video is dramatically dropping because of Reels, because of TikTok, because of we want it now. Like give me dopamine in 30 seconds or I'm off, and people becoming fish. So I think some of it's genetic, some of it is just environment, and that's okay.
I think it's this interesting when you mentioned Reels and TikTok, because there are still a massive demand for long form podcasts, which shows that once people have got over that barrier of a 15-second reel, people are willing to do long form entertainment. So there is almost a bit of a battle between people that can't do it at all and people that can. And I love long form podcasts. There's a reason why I run my own. But I find it hard. Like I'm there, my phone will come up and I'll be half in Candy Crush and half in Diary of a CEO. And like, that's something that even me with ADHD didn't remember feeling this severe just a few years ago. And I remember, like, it was interesting you mentioned about the limo thing. I remember something that Adam Haley actually taught me about online coaching long before he was ever an online business coach, where he was like, he used to do written check-in emails. And he said to me, he goes, Simon, like, these videos that you do are great. Now it's commonplace doing the Loom videos, but it's like giving someone a Ferrari every day. Eventually, when you didn't give them it, if you're on holiday and you send them an email, they go, where's my Ferrari? Whereas if you just had a normal check-in system, whatever was needed at the time, and then you gave them above and beyond, you are now the greatest coach in the world. And I think a lot of coaches, going back to what you were saying earlier on, burn themselves out by trying to give this incredible service that maybe just isn't necessary, and actually isn't giving the better service because they've now got to watch a 30-minute video over read a 2-second check-in.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to instant dopamine. You mentioned this wasn't a problem a few years ago. I would challenge you to say your environment was probably very different 3 years ago, and your expectations were very different. I don't really like phone communication. I don't really like texting. As you can imagine, that creates problems in my personal life when people are trying to connect with me and see what I'm up to. Yeah. I wish there's a part of me, obviously I couldn't live the life I live now without it, but it would be so cool if there was like a direct split between your business life and your personal life. And it could be like, I'll see you next week at 3 p.m. and then you go and see them at 3 p.m. and then that's how you got to catch up. Not all these texts and informations and voice notes and whatever, So the world's different. When I think about my dad and like the world that he lived in, the speed it took to get to know someone, so much longer. Whereas now you can go on somebody's profile, you can go on their website, you can research, you already know their background, you already know what they're about, you already know who they are, you already know what drives them, you already know all of that stuff. So when you think about that, that's fucking difficult. Really difficult.
I'm the same with that. I one of the biggest things I've always struggled with in my coaching business is touch points. I know I'm a very, very good coach. I know I can get great results for people, but the people that need more, and you could probably say this by my point earlier on about people needing more text time, I struggle with that immensely because it's like, it's not that I don't care. It's that I'm not the person that sits and remembers every day that I need to text this person, this person, this person. If someone doesn't text me, I don't immediately assume I need to text them. And that's always been my biggest battle with this. And, I'm very, very similar to you. But it brings me on to one last point I want to speak about before I let you get on with your day and get on with your other calls, and that is imposter syndrome. Because I think this is something that I think we're going to share very similar views, because I don't think it's a negative now, but I used to. What's your view on imposter syndrome, and why do so many coaches face it?
I don't think it's the imposter syndrome in itself that's ever an issue. It's your relationship with it. And I often say this to my clients, it's not the thing that's happening in your life that is often the issue. It's your relationship with it. That is the issue. And on the day-to-day performance commercial puzzles, like, that's very rarely is it fatal. Do you know what I mean? So when we think about imposter syndrome, what is a syndrome? A syndrome is a series of characteristics and behaviors that is put into, which is categorized. And an imposter is feeling like a fraud. So imposter syndrome essentially is a series of behaviors, thoughts, and beliefs associated with feeling like a fraud, essentially. And when you go to new levels, well, guess what? Sometimes you inherently are a fraud because you haven't done it yet. Doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means you haven't done it yet. And you're always going to experience this. You're going to experience the same emotions to different experiences. It's how do you ride those emotions? I've done tons of podcasts, but I've never been on the radio. I've been invited to go on the radio this year a couple of times, and I go on the radio and I'm like, the first time I did it, I was like, fucking hell, I'm on the radio. Like, who am I to go on the radio? Like, well, I went, hang on a minute, it's just a live podcast, mate. You've done hundreds of these. What are you on about? And it's just a quick reminder. Like, this is just signs that you're going to another level. And it's getting in touch with the chemicals that you feel. So your imposter syndrome, is it in your head or is it in your chest? Is it in your stomach? Is it in your back? And understanding all of that. So when you do that, well, then guess what? You can start to go, well, this feeling is coming up, which is just evidence that I'm going to another level. So what the first half is just changing your relationship with it and understanding that it's a good thing because it's a sign of growth. Not a sign that you're not enough, not a sign that you're a fraud. It's just your relationship with those thoughts and those feelings. The second part is more the emotional content of that. At which point in your childhood did you decide you weren't enough? At which point in your childhood did you decide that you were a fraud in whatever way? And once you start to understand where that comes from, and you start to unpick that, and you start to reprogram that in your subconscious mind, well, the same stimulus that used to trigger that feeling of you being a fraud just isn't there anymore. And it's different. And you can all start to feel a lot more calm, a lot more confident. And then when you really make a big jump up into the next level, well, then that feeling will come up again, but you'll understand it's that inner child that's going, I need a bit of reassurance. And you go, well, given that this is just an experiment and I've got nothing to lose, who cares? So that's my views on imposter syndrome. It's a good thing. It's your relationship with it that's an issue, not the imposter syndrome itself.
I love like I always find with podcasts, in the 115 episodes that I've done, things always come round full circle. And like a Ricky Gervais comedy gig, you've managed to take your first lesson and pair it in with your last one, which I think is absolutely interesting. And I totally agree with you. I think for me, imposter syndrome, I remember getting asked by an old mentee of mine, Ryan Anderson, who I think has done TMP. I think he's one of the testimonials on your website. And he asked me, when did it click? Before I went to Hong Kong, there was about 4 or 5 trainers, and I did an open Q&A before I left. And he asked, like, when did it click for you that you guys could get results? And 3 or 4 people said their answers. And I said, for me, I don't think it has, despite being the most experienced guy there. And I think for me, it was like, that's when I realized that the imposter syndrome I feel is the reason why I invest in mentors. It's the reason why I try new things. It's the reason why I started a podcast to speak to cool people like you. It's that a little bit of inadequacy, if harnessed well, keeps you pushing. It's this thing that's not getting complacent. It's knowing there's always more to learn. And if I clicked for me 5 years ago, would I have rested on my laurels? And I would have had anywhere near the experiences that I've had since? I would argue probably not.
And I guess the next phase is then going, well, is that inadequacy going to be what takes me to the next level? And if the answer is yes, then keep it. If the answer is I'm not sure, and don't be afraid to explore that, because what takes us to certain levels isn't necessarily what takes us to the next levels. And if you're starting out in a completely new field and you've never done anything like coaching before, then that's pretty good. But if you've been around the block and you've got a lot of experience, there's that inadequacy that could stop you, and fear of failure, fear of it not working out, fear of not being enough, that then leads into procrastination, that leads into the consequences of procrastination and the waste of time where you could just be lying there looking at the ceiling versus beating yourself up for looking at the ceiling and not working,
Yeah, that's something that I can definitely relate to, and I've generally enjoyed this conversation. This is something that if you ever have time for a part 2, there's so much more I could ask you here, but and I will definitely be reaching out in terms of looking at getting you guys to help me, because I think so many of those stories resonated with me, and realizing how much what you do is incredible and really powerful. So if this conversation has been informative to any of you guys, like it has done for me, where can people find you and Total Mental Performance?
Yeah, so I'm sure there'll be links in the show notes. So one place is at Total Mental Performance on Instagram. That's where you're going to get loads of just daily content and snippets of mental performance and mindset. If you're like, I'll listen to that and I need to talk to these guys, whether that's joining our group coaching program in the academy or whether that's in one-to-one, then head to www.totalmentalperformance.com, click apply for a call, and then we review all the applications and we'll come back for you from there.
Awesome, man, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure. Generally enjoyed this. Thanks for coming on the show.
Big love. Thank you for having me on.
No problem at all. Guys, thank you very much for watching the podcast. If you're like me and like to binge watch podcast episodes, click here for our most recent episode. And if you enjoy the show and want to be updated when new videos come live, click here to subscribe to the channel.